Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Sanaa Sterling, and I am 29 years old. For 3 years, Preston Vance knew me as Janelle Price, a quiet woman with a modest apartment, a simple job at a boutique design firm, and no powerful family standing behind her. He believed I was ordinary. He believed I was grateful to be loved by him. He believed that if he embarrassed me, neglected me, or allowed his mother to insult me, I would lower my head, swallow the pain, and stay. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was waiting until just before we exchanged vows to show me exactly how little he thought I was worth. We were standing beneath a crystal arch inside the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel in Manhattan. Hundreds of guests watched from rows of ivory chairs. The officiant had just asked us to face each other for our vows when Preston suddenly lifted one hand and said, "Wait." The room went silent. At first, people thought he was nervous. I knew he was not. His face was too calm, too practiced. He turned toward the side doors and gestured. The spotlight followed his hand, and another woman stepped into the ballroom wearing a white cocktail dress and a trembling little smile that was too perfect to be real. Her name was LaToya Sutton. She looked timid from a distance, but when her eyes met mine for half a second, I saw the truth. That fragile expression had been rehearsed. She walked toward us slowly, as if she were afraid of everyone's judgment, then placed herself at Preston's side. Preston wrapped an arm around her shoulders. His mother, Beatrice Vance, sat in the front row with her chin raised and a thin smile on her face. She had never wanted me. She had called me plain, unpolished, forgettable, and lucky. I had endured every insult because I believed Preston loved me enough to choose me when it mattered. I had helped him prepare investor dinners, reviewed design proposals for his resort project, stayed up late listening to him complain about board pressure, and let him lean on my patience while his company quietly bled money. I thought loyalty meant something to him. In that moment, I learned it only mattered when it served his pride. Preston finally looked at me and said, "Janelle, you can step down now." The words landed colder than any shout could have. Gasps moved through the room. Someone near the back laughed under their breath. LaToya lowered her eyes, but the corner of her mouth lifted before she hid it. Preston continued, "LaToya has waited for me for a long time. I cannot keep denying what my heart already knows." He spoke as if I were an inconvenience, not the woman who had stood beside him for 3 years. Then his lawyer leaned toward the officiant with a folder. I understood the cruelty immediately. The public ceremony had been turned into theater, and the private legal paperwork had already been prepared with LaToya's name. This was not confusion. This was a planned replacement. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not ask him why. My gown was a custom couture piece in soft ivory silk and hand-sewn lace, expensive but tasteful, paid for through the account attached to the identity I had built as Janelle Price. Preston believed I had stretched my savings to afford it. In truth, the dress was the least expensive thing I had sacrificed for him. I reached up and unpinned my veil. My hands were steady, though my chest felt as if something inside it had cracked cleanly in two. It was not only humiliation. It was the memory of every quiet night I had defended him to myself. Every time I told myself his coldness was stress. Every time I believed patience would be rewarded. Preston seemed unsettled by my silence. He expected a scene. He expected tears he could dismiss as proof that I was unstable. Beatrice expected me to collapse. LaToya expected me to fight for a place she had already helped steal. Instead, I gave Preston the smallest nod and said, "I understand." Then I gathered the skirt of my gown and walked down the aisle. My heels struck the marble floor with a clear, steady rhythm. Behind me, Preston cleared his throat and said, "Continue." The word followed me like an insult, but I did not turn around. The ballroom doors closed behind me, cutting off the whispers, the music, and the ceremony that had become a confession of their own stupidity. In the hallway, the air smelled faintly of gardenias from my perfume. I turned away from the main elevators and entered the fire stairwell. I had not planned for betrayal to happen at the altar, but I had planned for the possibility that Preston would eventually reveal his true face. A small phone was sewn into a hidden pocket beneath the inner layer of my gown. I pulled it out and sent one message to my father. "Secure the footage. Make sure no one tampers with it. I am leaving through the service exit." His reply came almost immediately. "Car is waiting. Keep your head high." I changed in the stairwell, not by tearing the dress apart like some dramatic performance, but by removing the overskirt and slipping into the black suit and flats my security team had placed in a garment bag behind the landing door. The freight elevator took me to the underground garage, where an unmarked black Escalade waited with 2 security agents. Daphne, my executive assistant, sat inside with a thermos of tea and a new phone. She said, "The old line is still active, but all calls are being routed through a monitored channel. The new number is secured. Only your parents, legal counsel, and the senior team have it." I took the phone and stared out the tinted window as the car moved through Manhattan traffic. I was not helpless Janelle Price anymore. I was Sanaa Sterling, the only daughter of Reginald and Vivica Sterling, and the future executive vice president of Sterling Holdings. Preston had not abandoned a weak woman. He had publicly insulted the one family his company had quietly depended on for years. My real home was in Greenwich, Connecticut, behind iron gates and stone walls. Preston would never have been invited past on his own merit. My father stood on the front steps when the car arrived. He was calm, elegant, and frighteningly composed. He looked at my simple black suit, then at my face. "You are hurt," he said. "Do not pretend you are not." That one sentence nearly broke me more than Preston's betrayal. My mother came out behind him and took both my hands. She did not ask for every detail. She only said, "You loved him honestly. That is not a weakness. His mistake was thinking honesty made you powerless." I went upstairs, showered, and sat alone for 10 minutes before I let myself breathe properly. 3 years of pretending to be Janelle had not been a game. My family had considered a strategic alliance with Vance Enterprises, and I had agreed to meet Preston without the weight of my surname. I wanted to see who he was when he believed there was nothing to gain from me. At first, he had seemed ambitious, disciplined, and protective. Over time, the mask slipped. He let his mother belittle me. He accepted my help without gratitude. He hid business failures behind arrogance. Still, I stayed because I thought love required patience. That was my mistake, and I owned it. Late that night, Preston called the old number. The call came through the monitored channel, and Daphne handed me the phone. I answered without speaking. His voice was tight, impatient, and slightly shaken. "Janelle, where are you?" I said nothing. He exhaled sharply. "I know today was painful for you, but LaToya and I have history." She waited for me. "You need to be reasonable. I will compensate you. The apartment can be transferred to your name, and I can arrange enough money for you to start over comfortably." I almost laughed. "The apartment your company listed as executive housing under a bridge loan expense?" I asked. Silence swallowed the line. "Keep it, Preston. You will need every asset you can explain." Then I hung up. The next morning, I returned to Sterling Holdings in Manhattan under my real name. The senior legal team, finance division, and compliance officers were already waiting. I gave one instruction before anyone discussed revenge. Everything stays legal. No rumors we cannot support. No market games. No threats. We expose what they did, and we let their own decisions bury them. My father looked pleased. The Vance problem had 3 parts. First, Preston had used company resources to impress LaToya and hide personal expenses. Second, Vance Enterprises had cut corners on the Hudson River Harbor Resort project, using substandard materials supplied by Arthur Sutton, LaToya's father. Third, Beatrice Vance had approved several questionable payments routed through consulting invoices. We did not destroy Vance overnight. That would have been too easy and too suspicious. We withdrew informal support Sterling had quietly provided through introductions, supplier confidence, and friendly financing conversations. We notified the appropriate regulators with documented evidence. We allowed creditors to review the same public filings they had ignored when Preston's confidence made them feel safe. Within days, one bank requested clarification on the bridge loan. A supplier demanded payment assurance. The resort board delayed a key inspection. Nothing dramatic happened all at once, but the floor beneath Preston began to loosen. Daphne also brought me the file on LaToya. I already knew she had pursued Preston, but I had not known how carefully she had planned it. There were messages between her and Beatrice from months earlier. One read, "He cares about Janelle because she is convenient, not because she is special." Another said, "Once the ceremony is public, she will be too embarrassed to fight. Women like her disappear quietly." LaToya had also sent Preston a photo of the ballroom seating chart and written, "Make her step down in front of everyone. Then they will know I won." I stared at that message longer than the others. It was not the cheating that hardened me. It was the pleasure she took in my humiliation. 2 nights later, The Whitmore Charity Gala was held at Zenith Tower in Manhattan. Preston planned to use it to introduce LaToya as Mrs. Vance and reassure nervous lenders that his life and company were stable. He had no idea I would be the guest the hosts were most eager to receive. I chose a midnight blue velvet gown, simple in shape and severe in elegance. The sapphire jewelry came from our family vault in Newport, Rhode Island. My mother clasped the necklace around my throat and said, "Do not go there to prove you are beautiful. Go there to prove you are untouchable." I smiled for the first time since the wedding. "No," I said. "I am going to prove I was never beneath them." I arrived just after 8 in the evening. The ballroom was filled with executives, donors, old family names, and people who pretended not to care where they were seated while secretly caring more than anything. The head table was near the stage. Preston and LaToya were placed several rows back among mid-tier executives and ambitious climbers. When the maitre d' saw my invitation, his entire posture changed. "Miss Sterling," he said, bowing slightly. Conversations near the entrance softened. A few people recognized the necklace first. Then they recognized my father's surname. Then they recognized my face from private family announcements. Preston had never been important enough to see. I walked in slowly, not because I wanted attention, but because I refused to rush through a room where I belonged. The reaction spread naturally, one table at a time. Mr. Whitmore stood. Mrs. Astor turned toward me with open warmth. Quentin Hayes, the young head of Hayes Capital, lifted his glass from across the room. Then I heard glass break. I did not need to look to know who had dropped it. Preston stood frozen beside LaToya, his face drained of color. LaToya's hand clamped around his arm as if she could hold his world together by force. Her pink sequined gown, chosen to dominate the room, suddenly looked loud and desperate beside the quiet authority surrounding the head table. Preston whispered my old name. "Janelle." It carried farther than he intended. Several guests turned. LaToya hissed, "Preston, stop. That is Sanaa Sterling." He stared at me as if his mind could not join the two women together. The woman he had dismissed at the altar and the woman the room now stood to greet were the same person, and the realization crushed his expression. I did not answer him. I greeted the hosts instead. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Astor, good evening. My father sends his regards." Mr. Whitmore smiled warmly and said, "Your family honors us by sending you." That simple sentence did more damage than any insult. Preston heard exactly what he had thrown away. During the charity auction, I raised my paddle for a painting my father had donated years earlier and bought it back at a price that made the room murmur. It was not waste. It was a message. Some things return to where they belong. Preston watched from the middle rows, unable to approach without looking desperate and unable to leave without admitting defeat. LaToya tried to smile at anyone who looked her way, but the social doors she had dreamed of entering were already closing. People were polite to her in the way they were polite to someone standing too close to an accident. After the auction, Preston finally forced himself to come over. LaToya followed half a step behind him. His voice was rough when he said, "Miss Sterling, have we met before?" The question was absurd, but I understood why he asked it. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to pretend, in public, that he had not called me by another name. I looked at him calmly and said, "Mr. Vance, I meet many people. Very few leave an impression." A quiet ripple moved through the guests nearby. His jaw tightened. "You lied to me," he said under his breath. I set my glass down. "No, Preston. I loved you without using my name as leverage. You betrayed me because you thought I had none." LaToya's face twisted. "You tricked him," she said. "You pretended to be some simple woman." I turned my eyes to her. "And you pretended to be innocent. We all made choices." Then I opened my clutch and removed one folded sheet of paper. I did not wave it around. I simply placed it on the cocktail table between us. It was a printed copy of her message to Beatrice about humiliating me publicly. Preston's eyes dropped to the words. His lips parted. I said, "You did not rescue a woman who loved you, Preston. You joined two people who wanted to break me for entertainment." The silence around us sharpened. Preston read the message twice. LaToya reached for the paper, but Quentin Hayes stepped beside the table and said, "I would not touch evidence at a charity event." His voice was pleasant, almost bored. He had known Preston since business school and disliked him for reasons that had nothing to do with me. Earlier that week, my team had confirmed Preston had once stolen a competition proposal from him and used it to impress investors. Quentin did not need to become my savior. He only needed to stand where Preston could see another door closing. Preston looked around and realized the people he had hoped to impress were watching him with quiet disgust. I leaned closer, speaking softly enough that he had to listen. At the wedding, you told me to step down. Tonight, I am returning the courtesy. Step away from my table. His face flushed dark with humiliation. Latoya whispered, "Let us leave." For once, Preston obeyed her, but not because he loved her. He left because he had no clean sentence left to say. As he turned, I saw regret finally enter his eyes, not the noble kind, not the kind that comes from understanding pain, but the selfish kind that appears when a man realizes the woman he discarded owned the room he was begging to enter. The morning after the gala, the first formal inspection notice hit the Hudson River Harbor Resort project. The State Building Authority requested records on concrete, insulation, and fire-resistant materials supplied by Sutton Materials. 2 days later, the Environmental Review Board requested additional documentation. The resort board postponed its approval vote. Preston tried to call me from 4 different numbers. I did not answer. He sent one message through an attorney asking for a private conversation. My legal counsel replied that all communication should relate only to business matters and be handled in writing. Calmness was my revenge. He had expected a broken woman. He received a paper trail. Latoya made her own mistake. Desperate to control the story, she contacted a gossip writer and claimed I had stalked Preston, lied about my background, and threatened her. Unfortunately for her, she attached edited screenshots. The original messages were already preserved by our legal team because she had sent them through accounts linked to Beatrice. Instead of leaking insults, we filed a defamation notice, then released a brief statement through counsel. Sterling Holdings would not comment on private relationships, but any false statement connected to ongoing regulatory inquiries would be answered with evidence. The message was clean, cold, and effective. By evening, Latoya's allies stopped repeating her claims. Over the next 4 weeks, Vance Enterprises unraveled in stages. First came the inspection delays. Then came the lender questions. Then Arthur Sutton's company was suspended from providing materials pending review. After that, auditors discovered consulting fees approved by Beatrice that matched payments from Sutton Materials. Preston tried to blame lower executives, but the signatures were too clear. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Investors began asking whether Preston had concealed personal conflicts tied to the resort. Every consequence led back to a choice he had made while believing himself untouchable. Preston's downfall was not a single explosion. It was a corridor of locked doors. Banks would not extend credit without clean disclosures. Suppliers would not ship without payment guarantees. The resort board would not move forward while investigators reviewed the material records. Beatrice stopped attending social events after federal investigators requested her correspondence. Latoya's father hired a criminal attorney. Latoya moved out of the Vance estate after Preston refused to be photographed with her. Their love story, the one important enough to humiliate me for, could not survive the first invoice, subpoena, or headline. Preston eventually collapsed during a board meeting, not from some dramatic illness, but from exhaustion, stress, and panic after 3 nights without sleep. He was taken to a private hospital, where doctors treated him for severe anxiety complications and high blood pressure. I did not visit. Quinton Hayes did not visit either. Instead, Hayes Capital sent a formal letter withdrawing from all informal discussions with Vance Enterprises and noting reputational concerns. That letter hurt Preston more than any bedside confrontation would have. It was professional, public enough to matter, and impossible to argue with. 6 weeks after the wedding, Vance Enterprises accepted a court-supervised restructuring plan. Sterling Holdings did not steal anything. We purchased selected assets after creditors approved the sale because our offer was the strongest and cleanest one left. Preston refused to attend the signing. Beatrice was preparing for trial. Arthur Sutton was cooperating with investigators. Latoya was not ruined by cruelty or name-calling. She was ruined by documentation, by her own messages, by her father's business records, and by the fact that the society she wanted to enter had watched her build a throne out of someone else's humiliation. I signed the final acquisition papers in a white suit, my hair pulled into a neat chignon, my hand steady around the pen. Across the table, Marlon Price, the remaining Vance board representative, looked hollow. He asked if there was room to negotiate the valuation. I said, "Your board is free to decline." He stared at the empty chair where Preston should have been, then signed. When I wrote Sanaa Sterling beneath the agreement, I felt no wild joy, no hunger to keep punishing anyone. What I felt was release. Preston had wanted me to step down in front of the world. Instead, he signed away his family's proudest assets to the woman he thought had none. That afternoon, I stood in my new office on the 80th floor of the Sterling Holdings Tower in Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling glass wrapped around the city view. Sunlight poured across the desk, bright and clean. I remembered the wedding hallway, the heavy dress, the cold look in Preston's eyes, and LaToya's practiced little smile. Then I let the memory pass. My phone vibrated with a message from my mother asking if I was coming home for dinner. My father was cooking, she said. I smiled and replied, I am on my way. Another message arrived from Quentin Hayes congratulating me and suggesting a future meeting between our firms. I answered, have your office contact mine. I put the phone down and looked over the city that had witnessed both my humiliation and my return. For 3 years, I had hidden my name to learn the truth. The truth had hurt, but it had also freed me. I no longer needed to prove I was worthy of a man too small to recognize loyalty when it stood beside him. Preston chose public betrayal because he thought my silence meant weakness. LaToya chose cruelty because she thought my grace meant fear. Beatrice chose corruption because she thought status would protect her. They were all wrong. I did not need to destroy myself to answer them. I simply stood up, reclaimed my name, and let their own choices finish the work. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.